She looked at me across the kitchen counter on a Tuesday morning in November, holding her coffee mug like it was a shield, and said the words that ended our marriage. Not the divorce papers, not the lawyers. Those came later. What ended it was 6 seconds of casual cruelty delivered while she was still in her robe, before she'd even finished her first cup. Lily and I are spending Christmas with Derek this year. She needs a real father figure. If you don't like it, you can divorce me. Then she walked back to the bedroom to get dressed. I stood in our kitchen in our house in the Eastlake neighborhood of Seattle, Washington, staring at the place where she'd been standing, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not rage, not grief, something quieter and more final than both of those things. Clarity. Because here's what Simone didn't know. Here's what she couldn't have known, because she stopped paying attention to the details of my life somewhere around year 3 of our marriage. She didn't know that 3 days earlier, my supervisor at Boeing's Renton facility had handed me a folder and asked me, for the 4th time in 2 years, if I'd reconsider the transfer to Nagoya, Japan. Senior lead on the Next Generation Composite Fuselage program. A team of 60 engineers, a budget that had more zeros than anything I'd ever touched. Every time before I'd said no, because of Lily, because I thought I was building something here worth staying for. But Simone just told me, in 6 words, that I wasn't a real father figure. So I picked up my phone and called my supervisor back. Before I tell you what happened next, I need you to understand who I was before that Tuesday morning. Because this story doesn't make sense without the man who stood in that kitchen absorbing those words without flinching, and it doesn't make sense without the 13 years that built him. If this story is hitting something you recognize, a family you sacrificed for, a version of yourself you've been putting on hold, I want you to subscribe to this channel right now. Hit the notification bell. Leave a comment below about a time someone underestimated you, because this community shows up for those stories. Now let me tell you the rest of mine. My name is Nathan Caldwell. I'm 45 years old. I've been a senior aerospace engineer for 18 years, currently with Boeing's Commercial Airplanes division in the greater Seattle area. I grew up in Tacoma, graduated from University of Washington with a degree in mechanical engineering, and spent the first decade of my career working my way from junior analyst to the kind of role where other engineers ask for your opinion on problems that don't have textbook answers. I am not a man who talks about himself easily. My father was a carpenter. My mother worked checkout at a Safeway in Puyallup for 22 years. We didn't have the vocabulary for self-promotion in our house. You did the work. The work spoke. That's the whole philosophy, delivered in a look rather than a lecture, passed down like a trade skill. I met Simone Hargrove at a New Year's Eve party in Capitol Hill in 2010. She was 31, working as an interior designer for a mid-sized firm downtown, and she had this laugh that seemed to belong to a room 3 times the size of whatever room she was in. I was 32, quiet, probably too serious, and I thought she was the most alive person I'd ever seen. She was divorced. That was the thing she told me on our 3rd date, sitting at a window table at a restaurant in Ballard, looking at me like she was waiting for me to flinch. Her daughter Lily was 2 years old. The ex-husband was a man named Derek Paulson, a personal trainer turned gym owner from Bellevue, who, from what I eventually pieced together, had been more in love with the idea of a family than the daily reality of one. He left when Lily was 7 months old, paid his child support on time, kept his distance, sent birthday cards that were always a week late. I didn't flinch. I want to be honest about why. It wasn't heroism. It was that I looked at Simone and I thought, this woman is carrying something heavy and doing it with grace, and I want to be the kind of man who helps carry it. We got married in June of 2012 at a small ceremony at the Volunteer Park Conservatory. Lily was the flower girl. She was 4 years old, and she refused to walk in a straight line, and she stepped on the ring bearer's foot twice, and she was the most wonderful thing I'd ever seen. I never legally adopted Lily. Simone and I talked about it once early on. She said she wanted to wait until Lily was older, until she could understand what it meant. I agreed. I would have agreed to anything Simone suggested in those first 2 years. I realize now, so grateful to have been chosen, that I didn't examine the terms closely enough. What I did instead was show up. Every morning at 6:30, I made Lily's lunch. I learned which kind of apple she'd eat and which kind she'd stare at like it personally offended her. I coached her soccer team when she was 7, even though I'd never played soccer in my life, and spent 3 evenings watching tutorial videos on YouTube to prepare. I sat in the back row of every school play and every winter concert and every painful elementary school talent show, and I recorded all of them on my phone even though I knew we'd never watch the recordings, because being there with a camera felt like proof that I was paying attention. I helped her with her homework. I drove her to sleepovers at 11 o'clock at night when she called me panicked and homesick. I taught her how to ride a bike in the parking lot of Magnuson Park on a Saturday morning when she was 9, and I ran alongside her for so long my knees hurt for a week. Derek, meanwhile, had graduated from occasional birthday cards to occasional weekend visits. By the time Lily was 10, he was seeing her maybe 4 times a year. Simone would arrange the visits with a kind of deliberate brightness, making sure Lily was excited rather than anxious, coaching her gently on what to say and how to behave. I watched all of this happen from a respectful distance because I understood, without anyone having to explain it, that Derek's reappearance was complicated and not something I was supposed to have opinions about. I didn't have opinions about it. What I had was my calendar, which was full of Lily's appointments and school events and the details of her daily life, which I tracked with the same precision I brought to technical specifications at work. At Boeing, my career had kept moving forward. I'd led my first major project team at 38, a structural fatigue analysis for a regional jet variant that ended up becoming the model for how the division approached composite wing testing. When the Japan opportunity first appeared in my inbox, I was 42. The Nagoya facility was part of a long-term partnership with a Japanese aerospace firm, and they needed an American lead with deep experience in composite fuselage structures. The salary was 40% higher than what I was making. The professional scope was unlike anything available in the Seattle market. I said no. I told my supervisor, a methodical man named Greg Tillman who had known me for 9 years, that I had a family situation that made the overseas timing difficult. Greg nodded and said the opportunity would likely come around again. He was right. It came around 3 more times over the following 2 years. Each time, I said no. Each time, Simone didn't know it had been offered. I didn't tell her because I thought it would sound like a complaint. Like I was scoring points. Like I was holding a door open in front of her to make her feel guilty. I wasn't raised to do that. So I said no to Japan, and I came home and I helped Lily with her AP chemistry homework, and I made dinner, and I didn't say anything. What I didn't fully understand during those years was that Simone had been doing her own quiet arithmetic, and the numbers she was arriving at were different from mine. The changes started around the time Lily turned 14. Small things at first. Simone started going back to the gym she'd quit when Lily was young, except this wasn't the gym she used to go to. This was a newer facility in Bellevue. She mentioned it casually, the way you mention traffic or weather. I filed it and moved on. Then Derek started showing up more, not 4 times a year, more like once a month. Lily, who was at the age where she was discovering that fathers could be simplified in a way that stepfathers couldn't, seemed to enjoy it. She would come home from these visits chatty and bright-eyed, and I would sit across from her at dinner and listen and nod and mean it, because I genuinely wanted her to have a relationship with her biological father if that was what she wanted. What I was slower to notice was the way Simone talked about these visits, the way her voice changed when Derek's name came up, the way she started referencing him in contexts that had nothing to do with Lily. Derek thinks the housing market in Bellevue is going to flatten. Derek has a good eye for this kind of thing. Derek was, apparently, developing a good eye for a lot of things. I'm not going to tell you I was blindsided, because that would make me sound either stupid or dishonest. I noticed. I had the same conversations with myself that I imagine a lot of people have in that situation, where you explain to yourself why what you're seeing is probably innocent, and why bringing it up would be the real problem. I work with data for a living. I know how confirmation bias works. I know that humans pattern match toward threat. I gave myself all the rational explanations. But in October, 2 months before that Tuesday morning in the kitchen, I drove Lily to her Saturday morning soccer practice. She'd picked it back up at 15 and was genuinely good at it by now. And when I came home, Simone was on the phone in the backyard. She didn't hear me come in. I walked toward the kitchen to start coffee and I heard enough. Not everything. Enough. I don't repeat what I heard because it isn't the point. The point is that I stood in my kitchen in Eastlake with my hands completely still on the counter, and I understood the situation completely, and I made a decision. I was not going to be the man who erupts. I was not going to be the man who gives her the dramatic confrontation she may or may not have been expecting. I was going to do something much harder. I was going to think. I called my older brother Ryan that evening. Ryan lives in Portland, runs a small electrical contracting business, has been married to the same woman for 20 years. He is the person I talk to when I can't hear myself think. I didn't tell him everything. I told him enough. He said, "Nathan, at what point does staying become the most self-destructive thing you can do?" I didn't answer him, but I thought about it for a month. And then Simone stood in the kitchen on a Tuesday morning in November and told me my daughter needed a real father figure. And I had my answer. I called Greg Tillman at 7:45 that morning. He picked up on the second ring. "The Japan position," I said. "Is the offer still on the table?" There was a pause. Not a long one. Greg is not a man who pauses long. "Nathan," he said, "I was starting to think you were never going to call about that. I'm calling now. The onboarding timeline is January. Is that going to work?" I looked around the kitchen I'd cooked in for 8 years, the coffee maker I'd bought, the tile I'd helped pick out, the photograph on the refrigerator of Lily at age 7 on the sideline of a soccer field, holding a juice box, squinting at the camera, smiling. "January works," I said. I didn't tell Simone immediately. Not because I was playing games. I want to be clear about that. I didn't tell her immediately because I needed to do certain things first, and I needed to do them calmly and without interference from her reaction. The first thing I did was call my attorney. Her name is Patricia Weston, and she practices family law out of an office on Fifth Avenue downtown. And she is the most direct woman I have ever met, which is why I hired her 3 years earlier when Simone and I had started drifting in ways I couldn't yet name. I'd gone in for a consultation, listened to Patricia explain the basics of my situation in Washington State, and then done nothing with the information. Now I called her back. "My wife told me this morning she's taking my stepdaughter to spend Christmas with her ex-husband and that if I don't like it, I can file for divorce," I said. Patricia was quiet for approximately 2 seconds. "Okay," she said. "Tell me where you are in terms of wanting to actually do that." "I'm already past it," I said. "I'm calling to understand what I need to document and when." Patricia told me what to document and when. I'm not going to repeat all of it because it's not relevant to this story, but the short version is, I needed to be methodical. I needed to keep records of financial accounts and shared assets, and I needed to understand that in Washington State, which is a community property state, the division was going to be math rather than drama. I liked that. Framing. Math rather than drama. That was the approach I intended to take. The second thing I did was drive to Ryan's house in Portland on that Saturday. I didn't tell Simone where I was going. I told her I had a work thing, which wasn't entirely untrue because I spent part of the drive talking through the Japan project with Greg on the phone. Ryan and I sat in his garage for 4 hours. He had a space heater going and 2 beers and we went through the whole thing. Not the feelings, or not only the feelings, but the logistics, what the next 6 months looked like, what I needed to put in order, what the transfer meant financially, practically, professionally. At one point Ryan said, "What about Lily?" I put my beer down. "Lily is 15, I said. "Lily is not my legal daughter. Lily's mother just told me she needs a real father figure, by which she meant the man who left when Lily was 7 months old and showed up 4 times a year for the first decade of her life, and has recently rediscovered interest in the family he walked away from." Ryan said nothing. "I love Lily," I said. "I am going to love Lily for the rest of my life, and Lily knows it, and that doesn't change by me being in Nagoya instead of Seattle." Ryan looked at me for a long moment. "Okay," he said. "So what do you need from me?" "That's my brother. That's always been my brother." I told Simone on a Thursday evening in late November. Lily was at a friend's house. I had made dinner. Pasta, the one Simone had always said was her favorite, because I was not going to become a smaller person in the way I operated just because things had gone wrong. I sat down across from her at the table we'd eaten at for 8 years, and I said it plainly. "I've accepted the transfer to Nagoya. I'll be leaving the second week of January. And I've spoken to Patricia Weston. We can either handle the divorce cooperatively, or we can do it the harder way. My preference is cooperative." Simone stared at me. There are moments in a marriage that you replay later, looking for the thing you missed. I have replayed this one many times. What I remember is how long she was silent. Not guilty silent. Something more confused than that. Like she had prepared for a different scene, and I had arrived performing a completely different play. "Patricia Weston is a divorce attorney," she said finally. "Yes," I said. "You already have an attorney." I've had one for 3 years, I said. I went in for a consultation when things started to feel uncertain. I wanted to be informed. Another silence. Japan, she said. You're going to Japan. The Nagoya facility. I've been offered the lead position 4 times. I kept turning it down because I thought I had reasons to stay. I've reconsidered. Something moved across her face then. Something I hadn't expected to see. And I want to be honest about this. It looked like fear. Not guilt. Not calculation. Genuine fear. The kind that happens when a person realizes the story they've been telling themselves has a different ending than they thought. Nathan, you told me Lily needed a real father figure, I said. I've been her father figure for 11 years. I was at every soccer practice and every school play and every late-night call when she was homesick at sleepovers. I turned down this transfer 4 times because of her. And you spent 30 seconds one Tuesday morning explaining that none of that counted because I wasn't Derek. I kept my voice even. This is what I mean when I say I'd had a month to think. I'm not going to fight about it. I'm not going to make it dramatic. You told me what this family was to you. I heard you. Simone didn't say anything else that night. She left the table. I cleaned up. I went to bed early. The next week was quiet in the way that only happens when people are doing their own internal math and not sharing the work. I left for Japan on January 11th. My flight connected through LAX and landed at Chubu Centrair International Airport outside Nagoya at 6 in the morning local time. The facility put me in a company-leased apartment in the Higashi ward, walking distance from a subway stop on the 4th floor of a clean modern building with a window that faced east. On clear mornings, I could see the Yogoto area hills in the distance. I unpacked my 2 suitcases. I set up my laptop. I made coffee with the small pour-over kit I'd packed because I knew Japanese convenience. Store coffee would be different, and I'd needed one familiar thing. I thought about Lily. I had texted her the morning I left. Nothing complicated. I said, heading to Japan today. I'll have a different phone number starting tomorrow, but you can always reach me. I want to hear everything. Talk soon. She texted back, I know. Be safe. Send pictures. That was it. 2 texts. 11 years of parallel life and 2 texts, but they were real, and they were hers, and I kept them. I want to tell you something about what those first nights in Nagoya were like, because I think people imagine that when you make a decisive choice, when you finally do the thing you should have done earlier, you feel immediately vindicated, clean, unburdened. That's not how it works. What you feel, at least in my experience, is quiet. The kind of quiet that happens after a very long sound finally stops. You don't feel free yet. You feel the shape of what you were carrying. I thought about Lily every day. Not the abstract idea of her, but specific things. The way she pronounced particularly with an extra syllable until she was about 12. The look on her face when she figured out a math problem on her own. This narrow-eyed concentration that gave way to a visible release of tension. The time she called me at 1 in the morning from a school camping trip because she'd heard something outside her tent, and I talked her through it for 20 minutes until she fell asleep with the phone still on. She was 10 years old. She was fine. But she called me. That's what the quiet felt like. The outline of 11 years of small moments. At work, the scale of what I'd said yes to became real within the first week. The Nagoya team was excellent. Disciplined, technically precise. The kind of engineers who make you sharpen yourself just by being in the same room. The language barrier was real but manageable. About a third of my immediate team spoke English at a functional level, and Boeing had assigned a translator named Hiroshi, who was so good at his job that within 2 weeks I stopped noticing the language switch at the beginning of sentences. I called my brother Ryan on Sunday evenings. I kept up with Patricia Weston over email as the divorce proceedings moved forward. Simone had retained her own attorney, a man downtown whose name I recognized from advertising on the side of bus shelters. The process was not quick. These things never are in Washington. But it was cooperative in the way I had asked for. Math rather than drama. I did not call Simone. She did not call me. The call came on a Friday evening in Nagoya, which was Friday morning in Seattle. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, and I looked at the screen and the name was Simone. I stood there for 1 full ring, maybe 2 considering. Then I picked up. Derek's gone, she said. She wasn't crying, but her voice had the compressed texture of someone who'd been crying recently and had pulled themselves back together for the purpose of making this call. It wasn't what I thought it was. I didn't say anything. He came to Christmas. He was good with Lily. He seemed interested and present, and I thought. She stopped, started again. He called me in January, a few days after you left. He said he'd been doing some thinking, and he didn't see a real future with us. He said he wasn't ready for the commitment of an actual family situation. Those were his exact words. Not ready for the commitment of an actual family situation. I leaned against the kitchen counter in my fourth-floor apartment in Nagoya. Outside, it was a pale, late-afternoon light. A neighbor somewhere had music playing softly. "Simone," I said finally, "I'm sorry that happened." She made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "You're sorry." "I'm not glad he hurt you," I said. "I'm not glad any of this happened, but I'm not coming back if that's why you're calling." A longer silence. "I know," she said. I wasn't calling to ask you to come back. I just needed to tell someone who would understand. I needed to tell someone who would know what it meant." And there it was, after 13 years. She called me because I was the one who would understand. "How's Lily?" I said. The sound Simone made then was different, softer. "She's angry, not at you, at me, I think, at Derek, at the whole situation." A pause. "She asked about you yesterday. She asked if you two were still talking." "We text," I said. "She sends me pictures of her soccer games. I send her pictures of the city." "Good," Simone said quietly. "That's good." We stayed on the phone for another few minutes without saying much. There wasn't much left to say. When she hung up, I stood by the window and watched the sky change color over the Higashi ward, and I thought about the man I'd been in that kitchen in Eastlake absorbing 6 seconds of casual cruelty without flinching. I thought about Ryan asking me when staying becomes the most self-destructive thing. I thought about Lily's text. "Be safe. Send pictures." The divorce was finalized in April. Patricia handled it efficiently. The house in Eastlake went to Simone. I received the equivalent value in the financial accounts, which we divided without a fight, because we were both tired and neither of us had the energy for a fight. We could both see was pointless. I signed the final papers in an email at my desk in Nagoya at 7 in the morning, with a cup of pour-over coffee sitting next to my keyboard. Then I closed the laptop and went to the team meeting I had scheduled for 7:30, which was about stress tolerance in bonded composite panel sections at high-altitude temperature variation, and I was genuinely interested in the problem. And that felt like a form of grace. I want to be honest about something. There was a part of me, in the weeks after Simone's call, that waited for something to feel like triumph, like the satisfaction of having been proven right. I'd expected that, I think. I'd expected that at some point the score would be obvious and I'd feel the satisfaction of someone who played the long game well. It didn't feel like that. It felt like loss. Quieter and more complicated than anger, and less clean than either of those things. 13 years of a life. A daughter who wasn't legally mine, but felt like mine in every way that mattered. A house in Eastlake where I knew which drawer stuck in humid weather and which burner on the stove ran hot. All of it over. Not because of a single betrayal, but because of the slow accumulation of 1,000 small moments where we stopped seeing each other clearly. Grief and rightness can coexist. I had to learn that. You can make the correct decision and still mourn what the decision costs you. Those two things don't cancel each other out. 2 weeks after the divorce was final, I got a longer text from Lily. She was 16 by then. The text came in 3 parts over about 20 minutes, the way she always wrote when she had something real to say. She said, "I know things are different now and I know you're far away. I wanted to say I understand why you went. Not in a bad way, in a way where I think you had to." She said, "You were the one who showed up. I know that. I'll always know that." She said, "I'm going to go to University of Washington if I get in. That's only like 3 hours from Seattle. I'm telling you because it means in 3 years I'll be in the same time zone again. Just so you know." I read it 3 times. Then I called Ryan and read it to him, and he told me not to be a stoic about it and let myself feel something. So I did. There in my kitchen in Nagoya, letting myself feel something while my brother's voice crackled through the line from Portland. That was a year ago. I'm still in Nagoya. The project is ahead of schedule by 6 weeks, which in aerospace is the kind of achievement that gets noticed. Greg Tillman flew out in March for a site visit and shook my hand for about 3 seconds longer than a standard handshake, which is Greg's version of a standing ovation. I have learned enough Japanese to have a brief conversation at a restaurant without pointing at things. I have a favorite ramen shop 3 blocks from the apartment, A quiet place with 6 seats and a single menu printed on wood above the counter, where the owner knows my order and sometimes brings extra ginger without being asked. I run along the Horikawa River in the mornings when the weather permits. I have read more books in the past 14 months than in the previous 5 years combined. I don't talk to Simone regularly, but we are civil in the way that people are civil when they've decided that decency is worth more than the satisfaction of lingering resentment. She has her life in Seattle. I have mine here. Lily texted me last Saturday with a video of her scoring a goal in her club team's regional qualifier. The clip was 11 seconds long, and she'd added a little animated star sticker over the moment of contact with the ball. I watched it 6 times. I wrote back, "That is the cleanest strike I have ever seen in my life, and I coached your U7 team and I am an objective observer." She sent back 3 laughing emojis and a soccer ball. People ask me sometimes, colleagues, friends, my brother, whether I regret how things unfolded. Whether there was a version of events where I fought harder, stayed longer, made a different choice at some earlier fork in the road. I've thought about it honestly, the way I think about engineering problems. What were the inputs? What were the constraints? Where did the failure initiate? Here's what I come back to. I was a man who showed up. For 11 years, I showed up for that family with everything I had. I turned down a career that would have mattered to me 4 separate times because I thought I was building something worth the cost. And the woman I built it with stood in our kitchen one November morning and told me in 6 words that the whole structure had been invisible to her. I don't say that to assign blame. People see what they're paying attention to. Simone was paying attention to something else. That's the tragedy of it. Not that anyone was cruel, but that we were operating from such different maps that we couldn't even agree on the terrain. What I know is this. I am on the other side of it. I am in a city I never expected to live in, doing work I am genuinely proud of, in contact with a young woman who I watched grow from a 2-year-old who refused to walk a straight line into a 16-year-old who scores clean goals and sends me videos with little star stickers. That's the inheritance. Not the house, not the marriage, not the life I thought I was building. The thing I actually built is the one that sent me 11 seconds of video on a Saturday morning, and it fits in my pocket, and it goes everywhere I go. My father used to say, "You do the work speaks." He was talking about carpentry. He was talking about showing up on job sites in Tacoma in the rain and doing the thing thoroughly, even when no one was watching. But I've come to think it applies to most things. To marriages and to children you show up for, and to careers you take seriously, and to the man you decide to be when someone tells you that you're not enough. You do the work. The work speaks. Sometimes you have to cross an ocean before you can hear it. He didn't leave because he was angry. He left because he finally believed what she told him about himself and decided she was wrong. That's the hardest thing. Not the divorce, not the move, not starting over at 45 in a country where he didn't speak the language. The hardest thing was choosing to act like a man who knows his own worth, even when the person closest to him had stopped seeing it. I think a lot of us are waiting for someone else to recognize our value before we start protecting it. Nathan stopped waiting. Drop a comment below. Has someone ever underestimated you in a way that actually pushed you forward? I want to read your stories, and if this channel is giving you something real, subscribe. New story every week.